welcome everyone to episode 24 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. We have a fun episode for you today. Not that they're, not all fun, but today's going to be extra fun.
Extra fun, 100%.
So we're going to be talking about some of our favorite things. So these are our top fishing lures of 2023. Yes, the year's not over yet, but we wanted to discuss some of the things that we've liked so far, some of the baits that we've had good success with so far this year, so that hopefully if you have them, you can give them a shot and maybe better your fishing year while it's still this year.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And if you don't have them, you can buy them. Because unfortunately, I've had a lot of people message us and say, you know what? I listen to your podcast and I spend way too much money. So we apologize for that. But hey, what can I say? It's not our fault. Listen at your own risk.
Just for the record, Jesse apologizes, but he does not. His opinions do not carry on with the rest of the crew member here at Average Ontario Anglers, aka the one other person. We also have a little segment to begin with in this podcast, which is from Jesse. He's going to be handling it.
It's not interesting fishing fact this week. I forgot to tell you. I thought we could do a brand spanking new segment.
Oh, thank goodness it's not Triple T.
No. I actually had someone email me and they said instead of Triple T that we should call it TNT.
I like that more.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll get into
then we can
more of that.
steal the AC/DC riff from behind it.
Yeah. Well, it's copyrighted, so we can't afford that.
Well, we can just lower it an octave and then do that.
I thought we could do a cool segment where we tell a story that's happening between me and you when we've gone fishing.
Are you sure we're making this public now?
I've had a lot of people ask and say, you know what? You guys seem like you have been fishing together for a long time. And we've actually been fishing together for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
More than 20 years. So, of course, we've come across a lot of weird stories and situations and random stuff over the years. So I thought that we could actually tell one of the stories.
Okay.
Now, because it's Thursday, we're recording right now and it's Thursday, and it got me kind of thinking, like, Throwback Thursday. I'm always thinking, what should I post on Instagram on Thursday? And I'm like, I should post something that happened a while ago, something that's completely different than this season. So it got me thinking of ice fishing. And
Did you post something about ice fishing today?
I will later.
Okay. Because I'm like, I haven't looked at Instagram. I came right from work. I have no idea what you're talking about so far.
So I thought we could just talk about a very interesting ice fishing story that happened. And we're not going to say locations. We're not going to say names and stuff like that. But it was probably one of the coolest fishing stories that...
Now I think I know what you're talking about.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
What is it?
About, well, if I say that what I'm saying, it's going to spoil the story.
Okay. So we're not going to talk about the species either, because that'll completely... Basically,
fair enough.
Throw off the spot. So anyway, we were ice fishing one day, and we get to this spot, and we're trying this bay on the one side of the bay, and nothing, man. We're looking at the guys like literally 50 feet away from us, and they were slamming fish. Yeah. Like every 10 minutes, like boom, fish, nice, beautiful big fish. And we were literally 50 feet away from them, and we're like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah,
like, we're doing the exact same thing. We're using the same bait, everything, and they had got there earlier than us, and the guy was just like talking to us like, oh yeah, you got to be fishing here. You got to be fishing here. And we kind of were chatting him up, and he's like, why don't you come over closer to us? And we're like, oh, that's nice. Thanks so much. Like we were new to this kind of fishing. So we're like, oh, and we're happy to, hear any tips and tricks. Cause like, we're just getting into it. Right. So anyway, he's fishing and his rod was balancing on top of his chair.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
it's ice fishing. So he had two rods out.
Yeah. He had two rods out. He was hanging on to one rod, jigging or whatever. The other rod was sitting on his chair. And a big fish just grabbed it, and his rod just started, and it went straight down towards the hole.
It came off the chair, and like the reel didn't even catch in the ice. It just went like nothing but net.
But before that, he started running towards it, and it was just like a classic. He started running towards it, and then boom, he slid for it and boop, went right down the hole. And
his arm went down the hole trying to grab it.
Yeah, he was gone. So mad. And he's like, that's my favorite rod. And, I've had this rod and reel for so long.
Yeah.
And he was just so mad.
It had a lot of, he was saying it has a lot of, not nostalgic, but sentimental value for him. Yeah. Because you couldn't get that rod anymore.
Yeah.
And
it was the
he
perfect
loved
rod.
That rod. Yeah. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't the value of it. It was a sentimental value.
Yeah. So he was completely just fuming. He was just talking, oh man, I lost my rod and all this stuff. And meanwhile, Andrew had his rod set up at a hole a few feet away from us. All of a sudden, Andrew's rod starts
bouncing,
twitzing. So Andrew grabs it. He sets the hook and he's fighting this fish. And he's like, oh, I got one on. And we were all excited. He pulls up as he's fighting the fish. My rod goes off.
Yeah.
So all like two rods are going off, and this guy, his rod was down the hole, lost. So as I'm reeling in, I feel this fish just pulling and pulling, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a big fish. It feels really heavy, and it was going on good runs.
Yeah.
And as I pull my lure up, just a line came up on my bait, and I was like, oh, a line. So he's like, oh, that's my rod, that's my rod. So the guy starts pulling the line up.
So meanwhile, I'm like, maybe it's my line it swam around and grabbed hooked over Jesse's line and swam back. Maybe that's my line. So I'm asking the guy, like, what was your line? Because you pulled up braid, I think it was, right? Because I had on mono. So you're like, what's you're trying to figure out what line he had on the rod? It's like, oh, it has braid. And then I see the fish at my hole, so I know it's not 100% not my line. And I see this fish come up, and I just get out of the water, and I see my bait in its mouth.
Yeah.
And I see the other bait in its mouth, but it's got fluoro. I'm like, oh, it's not braid, it's fluoro. He's like, no, I had a leader on too. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
So now at this point, I've landed the fish.
Yeah.
And Jesse's still trying to pull up this line. So you continue on with.
Yeah. So anyway, so I had hooked the line that was attached to that guy's fish.
Yeah.
Which was attached to Andrew's fish. So
Yep.
long story short, Andrew, like he said, he got the fish out of the hole, and it had 2 baits in its mouth. I ended up pulling the line up, and the guy started pulling up with me and pulled his rod out of the water. That was the original fish that Andrew pulled out of the hole. So this stupid fish, or smart fish, I don't know, it grabbed the guy's bait, pulled his rod in the water, swam around my line, swam towards Andrew's bait.
Now, a big thing about this is this was not the rod goes in and all of a sudden our rods start going off. It was probably 20 minutes between
20
his
minutes
rod goes
later.
in the water, and then all of a sudden my rod's going, and then all of a sudden Jesse's rod starts to go. So the fish has been dragging around a rod or peeling line off this rod for the last 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then also proceeds to take my bait, like fully in the mouth, hook, like inside to outside of the mouth, like a perfect take. It wasn't just snagged randomly. And
and it still had the gumption to come up and eat another bait while it was dragging a rod behind it. Anyway, long story short, the guy got his rod back. He was ecstatic. He was so happy.
He told us all the secrets about that spot.
Yeah.
We're like, yay!
Yeah. I don't think we got it to that spot since then.
No.
But it was crazy. And just like everyone's rod was going off at once. And Andrew was the only one that actually caught the fish. So I thought that was a funny story because, like, what are the odds of that happening?
Yeah, that was nuts.
That's just insane. But that's a funny story. And it gets me thinking. I know we're in the middle of summer right now, but I'm really looking forward to ice fishing season this year.
I like it.
We
need to do more stories too.
Because we have a
we have
lot of
so
weird
many
stories.
of like I already when you started mentioning that, my mind is like, oh, we have weird stories. I'm like, my mind went to like 5 instantly. I'm like, okay, like these are stories we could tell.
Yeah, 100%. Also, speaking of, I just said 100%. We actually got a pretty funny review on Apple. Also, if you haven't left us a review on Apple or Spotify, please do it. But someone said that they love the podcast, but they said that you should play a drinking game and take a shot every time one of us says 100%. Which is hilarious because I'm like, yeah, we do say that a lot. You're going to get hammered. So I don't recommend playing that game. So whoever gave us
someone else said to do a drinking game where every time we mention a 7'1" bait caster, they have to take a drink.
100%. Oops.
Double shot.
Yep.
So that was a fun little segment to start off with.
Yeah, I thought we always do the interesting fishing fact. I thought we could start mixing it up. I do really like the interesting fishing facts. A lot of people do, but we're going to switch it up.
And we are going to have a few more stories, I'm sure, come out of this episode today, just talking about things that happened this year. They won't maybe not be as exciting as that one, but we're talking about our lures that we love, that we had good success with this year, from spring fishing, going for walleye, and then into bass, pike season.
Yep.
We're going to be talking about muskie, a bunch of stuff this year as to what's done well for us. Yep. So we'll get started. Jesse, why don't you start us off with one of the first lures you're going to feature? Doesn't mean it's the best one.
Okay.
We'll kind of talk.
We're going to go kind of seasonally.
Yeah.
All right. So this particular lure, this is an Evergreen FA 115 jerkbait. And the cool story behind this is, why did you buy me this again? Andrew bought me this.
I did a job and Jesse helped a little bit on the job. So he was like, oh, you owe me some money. I'm like, tell you what, I'll buy you a jerkbait.
I was joking too. I was like, you owe me $40. He's like, I'll buy you a jerkbait. I'm like, I think I got swindled. Just kidding. Anyway.
I gave you 2, so you didn't.
Yeah. So Andrew's like, I'm going to buy you a jerkbait. And he knows that I really like Evergreen. Evergreen, their stuff is phenomenal. And the price is fair for what it is. They have sticky sharp hooks.
Yep.
So he's like, oh, I'm going to buy you this. It's a deep diver jerkbait.
Yep.
And
I know you lost a couple deep diver jerkbaits and you're short. So I'm like, I know he'll use this.
And I was like, I want it for smallmouth and pike. So he's like, I'm going to pick out the color. So I was like, all right, I trust Andrew.
I know Jesse.
I'm very predictable.
I'm pretty predictable too, but Jesse's like, oh, look at these jerk baits. And he'll inevitably be deciding between two colors. And one is like a matte perch and one is a bright colored perch. And he's like, which one should I get? I'm like, they're both perch. Stop buying perch.
By the way, perch baits are amazingly
Really
effective
good
in Ontario.
Yes, they are.
But for smallmouth and pike, this color Andrew picked, I'm not sure what the color is off the top of my head, but it's like a translucent pearl with an orange belly. And this was probably one of the first hard baits that I used this year. Early season, like in our zone anyway, pike is closed, like in Lake Ontario, but there is in zone 17, you can fish for pike all year round. So in most other zones, pike doesn't, it closes for April because that's when they spawn. But in zone 17, they're like, whatever, fish for pike.
And that's because in zone 17, pike are kind of like they've moved into those waters because of the Trent Canal and whatnot.
Yeah.
So they don't consider, my assumption is that with the Fish and Wildlife Management, they're like, you know what, they aren't really supposed to be there. We didn't release them to be there. So who cares if you catch them while they're spawning? Because,
and most of the lakes too, they're musky lakes. So
yeah, they're focusing on the other established species that are already there.
Yeah. And again, if you want to listen to a interesting podcast that we did in the spring about early spring pike fishing, we do have a podcast. Yeah. Check out, it's probably like episode 4 or 5 or 6. It was pretty far back. But anyway, I went out and it was a cool day because I was actually on my way up to this fishing spot in zone 17. I stopped at Peterborough Pro Tackle. Now, if you're from Southern Ontario, you probably know Peterborough Pro Tackle. They're a really bougie, nice fishing store. It's not like Bass Pro Shops. You go in there and it's all high-end stuff. It's like a kid in a candy store in there. And most of the stuff I've never seen anywhere else. It's an
if you take your fishing hobby either semi-seriously to seriously, you love that store.
Yeah.
If you're like, I get everything I need from Canadian Tire, like
don't go there.
Yeah, it's not the store for you.
Yeah. But it's even just
unless
you're
looking to make it a serious hobby.
Yeah. You will spend too much money in there. But if you're ever driving through Peterborough, 100% you should go there. Take a shot. Yeah. 100%. But it's a great store. Anyway, I went up there and I had
this is non-alcoholic, but I'll participate.
Yeah. I put the Sports Pal, like my flatback canoe, on the roof, and I actually went into Peterborough Pro Tackle, and I bumped into Kyle Carruthers, who was actually in there. And if you don't know who Kyle is the guy who runs the CanCast Fishing Show.
Yep.
And I actually bumped into him there, and I looked at him and I was like, hey.
You want to try that sentence again?
I bumped into him there. Not literally, but I walked in the door and he looked at me and I just like pretended not to see him. Just kidding. But anyway, I saw him there and he was just like, oh man. He's like, you want to go for breakfast? And I was like, no, man, I'm going fishing. And then he's like, come on, let's go for breakfast. And I was like, no, I'm going fishing. Fishing sucked that day. I really should have went out for breakfast. But anyway, it was one of those weird days in April where it was that day that went up to like high 20s.
Yeah.
It was that weird like 3 or 4 days. And I went out there and I got a legit sunburn. And I was fishing zone 17. I ended up catching a few illegal bass. I was trying to go for pike. I ended up seeing a whole bunch of pike. They wouldn't touch anything that day.
Well, technically, as long as you're not targeting them and you release them without impeding the process of getting them back in the water, they weren't illegal bass.
True. But I wasn't targeting them. But anyway, correct. I was fishing and I was using this jerkbait and it was really good. And that day opened my eyes to see how amazing these evergreen jerkbaits are, because this is the first evergreen jerkbait I've ever bought or owned. And I really like it. It's a little bit bigger. So I thought instantly, I'm like, this is going to be
a really good pike size.
Yeah. And it dives the lips. It's not like a deep diver, but it dives, I find, like you're looking like 7 to 10 feet on a long cast, but really, really good bait. Since then, I've caught a few smallmouth on it. Nothing massive yet, but hey, we're average anglers. Don't expect huge fish. But so far, I would 100% buy another one of these.
Yeah.
I'm going to start saying 99%. I would 99% buy one of these. Hear that rattle? Oh, yeah. But yeah, that's one lure that I'm really, really glad I tried. And I would really look at other colors if I was going to buy more of them. Yeah.
I like it a lot too. It's a good jerkbait.
So why don't you pick one from the table?
All right. Well,
whoa, that's mine.
I know. I'm like, I brought like 3 and then you brought.
No, that's fine.
So this is one that I've done well. So this one's particular I've used in the summer. I didn't have this one, this white. It's a big blade chatterbait. I did use a big blade chatterbait. I had a green pumpkin one that I was using in the spring for pike. I didn't have the white one yet. I actually bought this at Peterborough Pro Tackle.
Oh, nice.
So
But the big blade, that's
the big blade.
really,
I love
really
it
like
for
it,
pike. Yeah, it's
and
really
bass.
thumpy.
And bass.
Hunts really, really well, I find. It really like knocks around a lot. And
The blade is what? It's got to be double the size of a regular blade.
I would say, yeah, surface area, it's double the size.
Yeah.
Easy. But
So we're talking about like a bladed jig. So it's like
Yeah.
a jig with a big blade on it.
and the thing that I love about the big blade is you can get them like they increase in weight a little bit, but not much. Like the heaviest one you get, I think, is 3/4.
Yep.
Is the heaviest one you can get. So
But you can still get like half ounce ones.
yeah,
if
you
you
get
want.
half ounce. I think they even make a 3/8. So I think this one here is the half ounce, and I really like it because you can fish the big blades a little bit shallower. So in the spring when I'm going for pike, I'm fishing like super shallow water oftentimes because they're getting ready in zone 17. They're getting ready to spawn in these super shallow bays. The weeds might be starting to come up, or it's old weed growth. So this, if it gets into any of the weeds, you can like rip it, cuts right through the weed. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of flash.
A lot of flash.
Like people say, oh, the spinnerbait is a lot more flash. Yes, it will. I agree. But the big blade, because of the bigger surface area, it gives a lot more flash than like you would expect from a chatterbait.
Mm-hmm.
And then because, again, it has a good, I think it's a 5/0 hook.
It's a 6/0.
6/0 hook.
It's a
There we go.
big hook. Yeah.
And it's still sharp. And this thing, like you nail that into a pike, they don't come off. Like I rarely have them throw the hook on these things.
Yeah. When they grab it, they're hooked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're usually deep. Like they inhale these things.
They love them. Everyone's like, oh, spinner baits for pike, spinner baits for pike.
Yeah.
Chatterbaits.
We went fishing last weekend and I had about a 22-inch pike, let's say.
Yeah.
And he had this thing all the way to the back of his throat. Like this exact one.
They engulf it. Yeah. And honestly, the big blade, when it came out, as soon as I saw it got released maybe 2 years ago, and I was like, that's going to kill.
Yeah.
And I own 3 of them now. I own a white one.
Yep.
They have this other color. It's called like, I don't even know. It's like white chartreuse and orange.
Yeah.
And has an orange blade.
Yeah.
And that thing for pike, ooh.
It is fast becoming my favorite of the chatterbait, of the bladed jigs, is the big blade. And I'll use it for, I was catching smallmouth on this thing. I was catching largemouth.
It's not too big. It's not too big.
It is, like, I do like, we talked before about the mini max, which as soon as bass season opened, or fishing early bass season actually in zone 20, the mini max, I love that thing. So jerk baits are great. I love them in the spring especially. But the mini max is just a smaller profile than your standard chatterbait as well. And what I'll do is I'll put on like Z-Man Ned rig baits. So like either a TRD, or I have it's the stingers or the little craws, the TRD craw, and you can use those as trailers on the mini max. They're like the perfect size.
Yeah.
And I love that. And that thing, I think it's only a 3/0 hook on that, and it like that's a smallmouth killer.
Yes.
And I like those in like a red or brown color because it mimics, like I figure it would mimic a good
little
crayfish, because like the chattering of it, if you ever feel like a crayfish in the water, or I used to catch them all the time and eat them, which they're delicious. I'll tell you stories about that another time. But when you pick up a crayfish and you'll feel like kicking, trying to get away from you, and they kick like really fast as your chatterbait is like vibrating. Yeah. So I think it's a really, really good imitation for, well, that color right there is a good example of a bladed jig in like a nice red brown color. Mm-hmm. Like that's sick. So that's kind of my go-to for smallmouth when I'm using a chatterbait. But the big blade, and I want to get some more colors. I want to get all the colors of the big blade.
if you want a lure, in my opinion, that you can tie on and fish any lake and have a fair shot at catching largemouth, smallmouth, walleye, pike, muskie, even a muskie will go, it's big enough that it'll attract a muskie. No problem.
Yep.
Highly, highly recommend. And again, they're a little more pricey. You might like, I think they're like $15.
Yeah, it's still like,
here's what you're getting for $15. You're getting a hand-tied skirt, so the skirt's not going to fall off.
Yeah.
Because remember the other day, we went fishing this past weekend. I was fishing a spinnerbait. A pike sideswiped my bait, and I reeled it in, and it nipped the skirt right off.
Yeah, the tooth cut right through.
Brand new spinnerbait.
I was using the old Blade Runner, or Blade Dancer, and the skirt. It's an old skirt, but yeah, it tore up inside of a pike's mouth too.
Yeah, pike just cut right through. But anyway, it's a hand-tied skirt. It'll stay on. It's got a huge 6/0, really sharp hook.
Yeah.
And just, they're quality. I've caught tons of fish on them. Yeah. Speaking of chatterbaits or bladed jigs, throw me those other two. So I thought we could just go through quick, because I was saying to Andrew, like, let's talk about our top lures of 2023 so far. And these two that I'm holding in my hand, they're both bladed jigs. Mm-hmm. I've caught more fish on these two lures, like bass, than anything so far this year. And the first one this is a jackhammer. I know they're expensive. I bought a few a few years ago as a treat. I was like, oh, I'm going to treat myself, see if they're worth the extra money. I still haven't decided if they are. They are amazing baits. Are they worth $25? For the average guy, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I know you're probably going to mention it too, but I am excited for the new you're mentioning as well, the Elite series.
Yeah, so the jackhammer isn't actually Z-Man. It's an evergreen.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so expensive and bougie and high quality and super nice. But apparently, I just saw at ICAST, they released the Z-Man Evo.
Right, the Evo.
And it literally looks like an evergreen jackhammer.
It's a purely Z-Man premium chatterbait.
And I'm pretty sure it's like half the cost. Yeah,
I'm excited for that.
It's a lot cheaper.
Yep.
Because I'm guessing, I'm not exactly sure how it works, but basically evergreen, it's licensed through Z-Man. And maybe that license ended or there's whatever.
So many, I need to do more research about ICAST, but about what's released, because I love seeing the new tackle. Like I know you're like to look at the new reels and rods and stuff that get released.
Yeah.
And for me, I love looking at the new tackle and I like trying weird things.
Honestly, ICAST this year, you're not missing much. It was a lot of
last year was really cool.
Yeah.
The year before that had some pretty good stuff.
Actually, an interesting idea. I was thinking about doing this earlier, but then I was like, but let us know, message us if you want to hear me and Andrew go through some of the ICAST releases and roast them. Or say our opinions on them.
Yeah.
Let us know, because I know a lot of people listen to this podcast, like you're into fishing, but you don't really care about new releases. And I don't really care about new releases, but I find it interesting to look at them, because some of the stuff you're like, come on, that's existed already for years.
I would love to see, like, I don't know too much about ICAST. I'm sure a lot of our listeners maybe have never even heard of it before, but it's a big fishing show that it's an invite only show. And generally it's pro fishermen, staff, stuff like that, that go tackle stores.
Yeah. And
they're invited to go and they release the new products. There are some rooms that they have it open and it's like a bunch of different manufacturers and a bunch of different like new baits, and only the top rated ones will actually be released. The rest get kiboshed. And I would love to be like one of the guys in that room, to be like, I want to see what ideas are coming up with for random stuff. Because it doesn't mean it won't work. It just might be like the stores are like, that looks stupid, I'm not going to stock that. So they don't vote for it. Doesn't mean that it's going to be a poor bait. Like imagine Gary Yamamoto with the Senko, right? Like that thing looked stupid. He had professional, what's
Roland Martin.
Roland Martin's like, that's stupid. It's going to ruin your company. Don't release it. And it's amazing. Like there are weird baits like that. And I'd love to kind of see what stuff doesn't get released just because they don't deem it as being very popular.
Yeah.
But I'd love to see that stuff.
It's actually interesting, because I always think, how many lures, say like a company like Rapala, that they come out every year, they have a bunch of new lures coming out. They're a massive company. How many prototypes and lures do they go through and they're like, you know what, we're just not going to release this because it's not exactly what we wanted. Because a slight backstory, I used to do tool stuff on my other Instagram account, and I used to get flown to events. So I got flown one time to Milwaukee Tool headquarters, and they took us into their plant where they design the tools, and they have all the prototypes, and they had like just huge areas, and they're like, oh, these are the Sawzalls. This is the 1 through 18 of the first prototypes that we decided not to go with. And they're all just like different designs, and you could see them, and they make them out of clear plastic so you can see all the parts inside. And it was just like, this one wasn't good. This one, we tweaked this a little bit. They made the next one, and you could see like all the generations of like the tools coming out for that one model.
Yeah.
So I wonder, like, obviously tools are different than fishing stuff, but I wonder, that would be cool to see like different prototypes that just didn't make it.
I'd love to like take a tour at like the R&D department of like manufacturing companies. Like for me, like that's fascinating.
I just see Andrew there just taking mental snapshots with his eyes. Anyway, so back to chatterbaits.
Yes, sorry.
So
that was a big tangent I took you on.
Big tangent. But anyway, I'm not saying jackhammer for this one. I'm just saying a white chatterbait with a silver blade, and I've got a white razor shad on that. I caught a lot of bass this summer so far in this. And I'm not a big white chatterbait guy.
Yeah,
I'm a green pumpkin guy.
I really like my white chatterbaits.
I'm a green pumpkin guy, but for some reason I tied it on one day. It was like slightly cloudy, and I was like, okay, I'll put on a white. And I had a day where I caught like a 4, a 3, another 3, like all in like 10 minutes. I was like, oh man, this is insane. I just must have been on a school bass or something. And after that, every day I'm just like putting it on. I was catching fish because I mean, it's a chatterbait. You're going to catch fish on it. But it's been insane. Now, another one I thought we could just give a little shout out to, because I caught my biggest bass so far this year on it.
I use that too. That
This is the True North
Yeah,
Baits
that's cool.
Chatterbox. It's a
Yeah.
bladed jig. It's got it's a Gamakatsu hook. It's
Yeah.
a sharp hook.
Yep.
It's a stout hook too. It's like you can't even bend the thing. And it's got a really nice painted blade. Like this is like a brown craw color.
Yep.
It's got a really nice epoxied like red blade
It's a
on
really
it.
nice like swim jig head too on it.
Yeah.
Like the lead pour is really nice.
And I just put a paddle tail. And actually, speaking of this particular paddle tail, this is another bait that I've done really well on so far. This is the Pro Water Baits. I think it's called the Magic Minnow. Don't quote me on this. We'll link all these lures down below if you want to check them out. Again, this is not a sponsored episode by any of these companies. These are just baits that we've had good success with. But the story behind this one was, it was actually, I was fishing a small lake, and the weather was like thunder and lightning. And I looked outside. I'm like, again, we don't have a lot of time to fish.
Yep.
So if I ever have a day off or I'm not working, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go, even if the weather's bad. So I drove an hour and a half up to this lake. Legit, it was just like cloudy. And I was like, okay, it's not bad. So as soon as I started motoring out to the spot, I have this spot on this lake where it's all weeds, and then there's like this nice shoal. Just like rocks and then weeds all the way around it. There's always fish there. I get to the spot, all of a sudden these big black rain clouds come in, and I was like, okay, I'm wearing my raincoat, that's fine, whatever. All of a sudden there's like lightning in the distance and thunder, and I was like, oh no. Because I'm like in the middle of this lake holding a stick in the air.
Yeah.
And I was like,
in your canoe, not my boat, which isn't very fat. Like,
yeah, I can only go 10 kilometers an hour. So I was like, oh crap, like this is bad. So I just got to the spot, and I was like, you know what? I'm an idiot. So I'm just starting to cast this. I was just casting this True North Baits Chatterbox, and it just started. I could see that, when you can see the rain coming in the distance.
It's like a wall.
And I was just like, oh my
death.
goodness. So I was reeling in fast, and this thing was it was buzzing right underneath the surface. And it just stopped. Like I thought I snagged a log, and then it just started head shaking. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I get this fish in, and it was a solid like 4.5 pounder. And it just like came up, and it was just bulldogging beside the boat. I got it out. I took a quick picture holding the fish. It flopped out of my hands. I was like, I don't care. I turned the motor on and just started driving. All of a sudden the wind comes out. The wind's like pushing the waves, and the waves are pushing my boat
There's
towards
no
the
draw
launch.
on the canoe.
And literally, the motor on my boat's like in and out of the water as the waves are going. I got to shore, I pulled it up on the boat launch slightly, and I jumped in the car. And then at that moment, it just started like Noah's Ark raining. It was like, and I sat in the car for 20 minutes, and I was like, I have no clue what to do right now. Like, I don't know if the rain's gonna last for hours. I'm like, I got to start packing up. I don't want to pack up in the rain because that would suck. So anyway, I waited, and I looked at the radar on my phone, and I was like, you know what? It should pass in 20 minutes. I waited 20 minutes. It started, slowing down. So it was spinning. I was like, all right, you know what? I'm going to go back out. Everyone else on the lake left.
Yeah.
I get to the canoe. It's like half full of water. I was like, oh my goodness. I start bailing it out. And I drive back out. And when I'm driving out, I see lightning in the distance again. And I was like, oh.
Maybe that's why your wiring fried like the next day after that.
Yeah, probably. But I went back out, and I ended up catching a few more fish. And it was a good day, and there was no one on the lake after that. But I don't recommend trying to catch that 4-pounder if there's lightning. But after that, I was like, that's a good bait. Yep. And it's True North Baits. If you don't know, they're locally made, great baits. Really like them. Quality components.
The two things I noticed about that, because I used it a little bit last weekend, caught a couple bass on it. I think I caught a bass and a pike on it. Yeah. I wasn't using it for too long, not because I didn't like it. I love that thing. It works really well. The two things I noticed about it that are different about how it runs is, I think it's because it has those 2 holes in the blade. It hunted really well. Like it was like it jerked side to side randomly, like really, really well. The other thing is, it was not as harsh of a vibration on the rod that I was reeling in. Like it felt like a lot less thumpy than a regular chatterbait. And I'm not sure if it's less resistance. Not saying it's still like loud. It's still vibrating water, like 100%. But it wasn't that like hard, like against your rod as you're reeling it in. Because I don't have a crankbait rod or like a soft action rod. I'm casting it on my like swim bait rod or whatever. Yeah. So, or jerkbait rod. So it's a stiff rod. So normally with the chatterbait, like I feel that thing. That thing was a lot more comfortable to be casting on that rod. I'll say that. And it still like hunted really well. Still produced great bait.
Yeah. And they are available on his website and at, I think like stores like Gagnon's has them too, but anyway, check them out. If you're looking to get a quality bladed jig or chatterbait, check them out. Yeah. And they're locally made, so that's good. Yeah, and again, that trailer, that Pro Water Baits minnow. Yeah. I just want to talk about this very quick because they're a bit longer. They're 4-inch, so I actually cut the head off of them with scissors, put a dab of super glue on, and I'll thread it on. And I normally don't like using a paddle tail on a chatterbait or a spinnerbait, but this is such a long, thin tail that the tail just, it doesn't have a lot of thump to it. The tail just kind of flitters, like, I don't even know the right word, like flickers behind the bait.
Yep.
And it's just a very cool bait. So anyway, that's another one. And, you know, if you've listened to any of our podcasts for bass, you know we like using bladed jigs or chatterbaits. And you know why? They flat out catch fish. You have people that are like, I can't catch fish on a chatterbait. I'm like, what are you doing? I can take out literally my nephew who's 10 and just be like, cast it and reel it in. And eventually you'll catch a bass. Yeah. So if you're having problems, just keep at it.
Yep.
Just keep at it. But anyway.
Vary your speed. That's all you have to do, really.
Yeah.
Like,
and if you're just tuning in to this podcast,
retrieve, change your speed throughout the day and see what works best.
We did a whole podcast about chatterbaits, so definitely check that out. I'll put that in the link below if you want to check that out. All right. So I think
enough about chatterbaits.
I think it's my turn because you chose that. So I'm going to choose one. All right. So this is not going to surprise anyone, but for a lot of species, it's hard to beat a topwater. Everyone loves fishing a topwater, right?
Yep.
And
it's the most exciting strike you're going to get.
Yeah. And I've done really well on plopper baits like whopper ploppers and Berkeley choppos and stuff like that. I actually picked up, this is the River to Sea whopper plopper 130, which is like the one that's, I think it's like an ounce and a quarter or something like that. It's the biggest one below the musky size. And I actually picked this up at Peeper Pro Tackle because they had it in stock. This is the loon color.
I remember,
I love,
because I got this bait. We got a few things that day, but I remember because you've been looking for that size for a long time, and you're like, oh, they don't have it. I'm like, yes, they do.
Yeah, it was right at the bottom. Yeah, so I picked it up, and I got the loon color, which is classic. The reason I got the loon color is I do have a bunch of Berkeley choppos similar color, but the loon color to me, I mean, hey, we love loons. Like you can tell there's a loon right in front of us here. But I tried this bait. It's a bit of a bigger bait. So if you're using like spinning tackle, I wouldn't recommend this size. I actually got this not even for bass. I got this as a finesse musky bait.
Yeah.
Done really well. Like we fish a lot of like smaller rivers where the muskie don't get huge. Like you're talking like a good muskie's like 36 inches. You know, you're not like, I'm not saying you can't catch a 50-inch muskie on this smaller bait, but if you're fishing for like, 25 to 35 inch muskie, this is a perfect size bait.
And if you don't catch a muskie, you're going to catch a big walleye or a nice big bass.
Yeah. This is a great size for bigger bass. I do find that the smaller size, like I think this is like what? It's got to be like 4 inches.
Yeah. I think that's at least 5, I'd say.
Yeah. So it's a bit bigger. So I do find the smaller sizes you get more hits for bass, but you can smash even 12-inch bass on this size. But I've done really well this year on this exact lure, the whopper plopper. You see all the hook rash and teeth marks on it. Mostly largemouth so far. We're excited. We're actually going on a muskie trip coming up.
I'm so pumped
and it's
for this
a
trip.
cool little river. And the muskie aren't huge there, but I'm excited because last year I caught a really decent sized muskie on a plopper. Yep. And the blow up on a topwater muskie is insane. This fish. So this is a cool story. So I was fishing a plopper and I had fished big muskie, not big muskie baits, but bigger muskie baits for about a day and a half. And I caught nothing. And I was just getting frustrated because I'm like, dude, there's muskie in here and I'm seeing them, but they won't touch anything. So what I did is I downsized to a 4-inch plopper, a bass size bait. And I was still fishing it on like a medium heavy muskie combo. And I chucked it really far out. As soon as it hit the water, this muskie just blew up on it. It didn't even plop yet. It just like literally hit the water and then boom, this muskie hit it. And if you've ever had a muskie or a pike just explode on a bait and it knocked the bait out of the water, it flew. The muskie did like a cartwheel, landed in the water. And my lure was still flying through the air. And as my lure fell and hit the water, I was reeling up the slack. The muskie came up and smashed it. Like it literally was looking for it. And then it smashed it. And I literally set the hook and had this muskie. And it wasn't a huge muskie. It was like 30 inches. But like that size, they're the jumpers. It jumped like 10 times. I was like, oh my goodness. I was like in the canoe. And
I love targeting pike with like topwater walking baits, like a big spook. And like they just launch themselves 3 feet out of the water.
It's so exciting. And again,
they'll hit it 7 times before you get them actually hooked. Yeah. It's just fun.
It's funny because I'm looking at this table right now, and we haven't got into this the stick bait here. But when I used to work at the tackle shop, sometimes I always say this: people would come in and be like, "Hey, I've never fished before," and they're like, "I need a few baits. Just I'm going to the cottage or whatever." And some of the baits here, like they're so basic, the ones that we're talking about today, I would always recommend, like for bass, I'd say chatterbait. I'd pick them up at chatterbait.
That's the first thing I always recommend is a chatterbait.
The second one would be a bag of stick baits, which we'll talk about next. And then usually the third one, I'd pick up a topwater for them, and it would just be like a medium-sized Berkeley Chopo.
Yep.
And I'm like, literally, with those 3 baits for bass, you can pretty much catch them in most lakes.
Yeah.
So like all these baits here, they're super basic. There's nothing fancy here. There's one fancy one, but we'll talk about that in a bit.
Yes.
But yeah, so anyway, plopper, if you don't own one, get one 100%. Like talk to any guy who fishes for bass. Floppers are like one of the most exciting baits to use and easy.
And it's the easiest topwater bait that has like a lot of action on the top of the water.
Yeah. All right, why don't you talk about this?
So these are the Wham Baits Wobblins. So they are a stick bait, and we talked about them before in another episode when Wham is sponsoring the episode.
Yep.
And they have a unique shape for a stick bait, but these things, they have like a crazy wobble. And this is a sweet color. This is the green pumpkin copper, and it's got like a red and orange like fleck to the green pumpkin.
One of my favorite colors that Wes makes.
Wes's green pumpkin is the legit green pumpkins. Yeah. I love that. I know you're a big green pumpkin guy.
I'm picky.
We were talking about that on the weekend. It's like like green pumpkin, and they have this weird it's these weird colors, and like Wes's is bang on. That's green what it pumpkin, should look like.
I like it to be more brownish green, almost like it's like always like barfy color.
Yeah,
but some guys have it spot on. Like Wes has it spot on. Vic from Pro Water Baits, his green pumpkin is perfect. But I'm talking about the Wobblins, but generally I'm just stick baits.
Yep,
and we did good on these this year. So there was a day, and I always have. I like to have. We always talked about having one hooked as a backup bait. Say if you're fishing a topwater and you miss a fish, always have a stick bait on and cast it to the same area, and the fish will grab it.
Yep.
Especially bass. But
or even what we were experiencing is because the frog bite hasn't been hot this year for us, like at all. And I know for a lot of guys it hasn't been.
Yeah.
When you'll get like a bass, they'll come up and they'll like hit it, or they'll just like slap it away. Like they'll blow up on it, but aren't actually taking the frog at all.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've yet to actually catch a bass on a frog this year.
I've caught a few. It has been slow.
But I've had strikes, but like their mouth is closed when they come out of the water. Like they're not actually trying to eat this thing. And so to have something like we talked about, a follow-up bait, they are taking subsurface baits, and I know exactly where to flip in that pad bed or in those weeds to target the bass that you just saw like surface.
Yep.
So that's why we always have them tied on. They're super useful because you've caught a few on the Wobblins.
Yeah,
but so we've done well on stick baits always.
Here's the thing: I don't want to sound like, hey, like we're pros or anything, but we buy a lot of baits. It has nothing to do with skill. It's really dumb, actually. So we bought all these baits, and like when you go out, you don't need 20 different kinds of stick bait. You only need one. But hey, like a lot of the guys and girls that, we deal with, some of these bait makers, they all make their own. So, I have to buy baits from all of them. Like I love it. Right. So I have stick baits from so many different
100%.
Bait makers, right? 100%. Yeah. So the wobbling, it just caught my eye. It's unique. I'm not saying that it'll catch any more fish than someone else's stick bait. I do like the design of it. And I tied it on one day and I caught a bunch of fish. I caught a bunch, nothing massive. I'm not even going to be like, I was catching 5-pounders on it, but I caught a bunch of 2.5s, 3s, 3.5s on it. Largemouth, no problem. It's a great stick bait and they're more durable. But basically, I think because we're just talking about stick baits, just like a 4 to 5 inch stick bait.
These are 5 1/4. So they haven't they're a nice size actually. Yeah. For a largemouth, they're really nice.
And actually, I have a trip coming up. Andrew's not going on, unfortunately. Algonquin. And usually when I think of Algonquin,
I'll be trying to fish on the East Coast. I'm sorry.
Oh, true. But usually when I think of Algonquin, I'm thinking smallmouth, right? Everyone's like, smallmouth, or like walleye, lake trout. But this particular lake that Andrew's been fishing at his whole life, I've been there maybe 3 or 4 times. It's actually a really good largemouth lake. And we've caught a bunch. Nothing massive, but we've caught some largemouth up to like 4 pounds.
I always catch bigger largemouth than smallmouth in that lake. I have seen 5-pound smallies there. I've caught a couple, not 5-pounders myself, but a couple in the 4 range on that lake. But in recent years, there's such a healthy population of smallmouth. You get so many dinks. It's dink central.
It's 8 to 10 inches,
Yeah. But largemouth, when you catch largemouth, they're big.
They're always 3 pounds. I think last year we caught one that was just almost under 4. Yeah. Remember?
Oh, yeah. We did catch yours was over 4.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we both caught, mine was at 4. Yours is 4 3-ounce.
Yeah.
Something like that. Because we both caught one over 4 or at 4 pounds last year.
And this lake, it doesn't even have largemouth vibes at all.
No.
It's a weird lake.
Deep rock. No weeds. That's.
But one of the main baits that we do use for largemouth there is a stick bait.
Yeah.
And I'm going to bring up some of the Wham sticks, or what are they called? Wobblins. It's just a great bait. Anyway, we have a whole episode again about fishing stick baits. So if you're just tuning in for the first time, we have whole episodes about stick baits. We have whole episodes about jerk baits. Go through our podcast and just look back. We're at what, episode 24 right now?
We're at, yep.
We have
24.
like 23 other really cool podcasts, so check them out. So anyway, why don't you do the next one? Why don't you do, no, that's mine.
Oh.
Do the snap jig.
Okay. So the snap jig, this is one that we had really good success on our spring camping trip.
Walleye trip, yeah.
So the weather, again, every time Jesse and I go on a trip,
It's crap.
actually like, oh, we're going to plan this in advance. We have a full day today. It's cold fronts move in.
Yeah.
And like rain. And it's terrible. This whole year we have yet to have a nice trip. Like where it's actually good fishing.
I'm not complaining, but this year for us, weather-wise,
a challenge.
Has been crap.
Yeah.
For us, yeah.
Which is, we're becoming better anglers because we're pushing through it all and we are catching fish. We're not getting skunked, but at the same time, we're not having the same results as we kind of expect.
Yeah.
Because we fished these lakes before and we know what they can produce.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Like we went camping last weekend.
Yeah. But the walleye trip was actually, we did really well.
Oh, it was insane.
We did really well on that, considering,
But when you fish a lake that normally you pull out a bunch of 3s and a 4-pound bass and you go there and you catch like a 12-incher because of the weather, it's disappointing. And it happens to everyone. But anyway, that trip was good.
So we were trying a bunch of stuff. Again, like we hadn't really done, this is our first year where we're actually doing trips for walleye. So this year, Jess and I decided we're going to fish for walleye, which I've been wanting to do for years.
Again,
like I'm excited.
We've caught walleye, a lot of walleye over the years. Is we generally, when we plan trips, we normally plan our vacation days for bass.
Yes.
But so anyway.
So we never really targeted them. So doing it this year was super fun. So we did the trip. We had the weather, again, turned trash.
It rained both days. Yeah.
Rained both days. Cold front. And what happened was we were trying to, like, I'm trying to use classic walleye baits. I'm like, okay, we're going to use like just a jig and a twister tail.
Yeah.
Like that always produces something. Like, especially on a back lake. Like you expect something. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We're like, okay, jerk baits or minnow like crankbaits. Like that's got to produce something. Nothing. You caught one the last day on a jerk bait because you're like, we've caught fish now. I need to catch on a jerk bait. And you like forced it. And you got one.
I caught a decent walleye in a jerk bait.
Yeah. We were trolling the one time, and I did catch one. I had the Beano, which is a classic walleye bait. It's the Beano eel actually. So we were trolling that, and I middle of the lake just happened to like get a walleye, which is nice. I'm glad I caught something on that bait.
Yeah.
But again, that's the only 2 baits that weren't the snap jig that we caught walleye on.
And the funny story was, so Andrew's trying all these. So Andrew, what he'll do, and I have my bad, fishing, quirks. So does Andrew.
Yeah.
I'm fishing, and I said, you know what? I bought these snap jigs, Berkeley snap jigs, and I put a little 3-inch, Zoom fluke style bait on the back. And I had watched a few videos on YouTube on like, this is a good technique for walleye. And I'm like, I want to try it. So I bought a bunch at the store. And Andrew had all these old lures that he's like, I really want to catch a walleye on these old lures.
Yep.
And I start fishing the snap jig and I start smacking fish.
Yeah.
And the cool thing with the snap jig is you just cast it out, let it sink to the bottom. And it has a fin on the bottom. So it doesn't just sink straight down. It actually glides. Yeah. And as soon as it hits the bottom, you just snap your rod up. And then the bait,
you set the hook every time. You're setting the hook constantly
and
with
the
this
bait
thing.
Swings up and then it glides down. And as it snaps up, it attracts the walleye. And then as it glides down, you'll just feel like a walleye grab it. You'll just feel like
or you won't even feel it. Yeah. Well, for me, like I didn't even feel it.
And then the next snap up, twice, you'll have a fish on.
Yeah. Now you set the hook. It's
so anyway,
awesome.
I started doing this and I started racking up fish. Like I was at like fish number 5 and I was like, Andrew, like nice walleye. Put on one of these jigs. And he's like, no, I'm going to try this.
I wanted to use stuff that I brought. I wanted to be like, I'm not an idiot. I brought an assortment of baits because they're back lake camping. I didn't bring my whole tackle box. I'm like, I'm going to bring what I think will honestly work on this back lake. And I didn't want to admit that I didn't bring like the one thing that was working. Yeah. It was so frustrating. And I'm trying everything to like Jimmy rig my jigs so that they could act like a snap jig. And like, I'm like, oh, I have a small like hair jig, which I did catch one on the hair jig. Yeah. And I'm putting like flukes on it. I'm trying all kinds of jigs and lightweight jigs that have bigger soft plastics that are, Zeem in so they float. Maybe they'll glide a bit more. Like I couldn't do anything until finally I'm like, okay, Jesse, give me.
Yeah. I think I had caught 9 walleye before Andrew even caught one. Yeah. And then once the funny thing is he was like, yeah, I'll take one, I guess. So I gave him a snap jig. He put a trailer on it. Within 5 minutes, he caught a walleye. Yeah. And he was like, I'm sold. And then it was just like, after that, it was like even competition. It was like one in.
And we used this the whole time. And we found a really good spot. Yeah. That was just like loaded. Like a river came into the lake. It was like a bay with a small little creek mouth that came in. It was 11 feet of water.
Yeah.
And it was like mud and rock bottom. And we stayed in this bay. We caught, probably 5 walleye each out of this one little bay. Just it's just primo spot.
Yeah.
that was
amazing.
fun. That's my favorite little thing, like spot. That was my favorite spot of the trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, and again, we love trying new techniques, and now this is a technique that we're going to use in the future.
And the thing we did too, so because of the hook, I don't know if you were able to see it, but because the blade comes out underneath of it, what we're doing is we're rigging the fluke upside down on these things.
Because a lot of time the fluke has like a belly.
Yeah, so the belly like bulges down, but the back is flat. So we rig it upside down so it sits nice and flat, and it just gives you like a perfect profile on that thing. And then the walleyers have no problem getting that hooked, just like my finger there.
And they didn't hail it. It was great.
And it's
a great technique for bass too.
Yeah. I looked at the local store. They were out of stock, and I haven't been able to get them yet.
They actually, Gagnon's has them.
Is it back in? Okay. Because I still want some, because for walleye now it's a confidence bait, because that's all I caught walleye on the trip.
And that's the thing. I'm not saying that you need those particular jigs, because you can fish like
they worked really well for us, because on that trip, because of the weather, because of the temperament of the fish those 2 days, they were only hitting like big reaction strikes on finesse presentations.
Yeah.
That's it.
But you could fish the same technique, like snapping up a twister tail jig. They wouldn't touch it.
Yeah.
It's just that particular day on that particular lake.
Very finicky. So that's why they work really well for us.
Anyway, that's another cool lure we highly recommend. So I thought the rest of these are mine. So Andrew's just going to have to talk.
I still have this one.
Okay. So this is a really cool bait. I posted a picture of it the other day, and I got a bunch of people being like, dude, that looks sick. This is an evergreen buzzbait. Again, another evergreen, because evergreen is a cool bait. This is the Evergreen LB buzzbait, which stands for loud buzz. Because look at the size of this blade. Look how big it is.
Huge. Yeah.
Now, this is everyone's like, oh, it's just a buzzbait. This is a very unique buzzbait. Now, here's the thing. When you buy something that's like a Japanese or JDM style buzzbait, it is a little more expensive, yes. Mm-hmm. But the design of their baits, it's like they thought of everything. So like the head shape of this, see how it's got like a keel, so it actually rides on top of the water easier?
Yeah. I've got one of those too. I love that thing.
It's got a really sharp hook on it. But the cool thing about this loud buzz is it squeaks like heck. It squeaks like a mouse is like around.
You hear it squeaking in the water.
Yeah. So as you're running this, I know a lot of times in the olden days, people would buy a buzzbait and they'd stick it out their car window on the way up to the lake, so that basically they can wear the paint off the blade and on the grommet here, so that it gets all rough, so it would squeak. Because for some reason, that squeak drives the fish insane. Mm-hmm. This one, right out of the box, squeak like crazy. I was like, wow, this is insane.
Yeah.
But it's got such a big blade, and it's actually like, it's not even.
Yeah. It's well, they have the bend at the top, right?
Yeah.
So it's bent up there, and then it flexes down. So the whole blade is offset. It doesn't like pass through at an angle and full. It's not dead center. The whole blade is sitting low.
So as you reel it in, the whole wire frame like shudders back and forth.
Yeah.
It's it's the LB. It's a loud buzz, 100%.
It's
shot. But so I tried it on, and this is actually a funny story too. I was taking out this young guy fishing who didn't really fish that much, and we were catching fish. That was the one day I caught a bunch on the white jackhammer. And at that point I was like, okay, the sun was starting to, get a little low, and I was like, I want to catch something on a topwater.
Sun's getting pretty low there, big guy.
Yeah. So I tied on this evergreen, and I said to this guy, and I was like, dude, it's like first cast. I cast out, first cast, boom, 3-pound bass. I was like, right after that, I was like, I love this bait. And I actually caught a bunch of pike on it too, but it's such a cool buzz bait. And like, I don't fish buzzbaits a lot, but I've caught some good ones over the year. Remember at Algonquin, I caught that really nice one on a buzzbait.
Yep.
So a cool thing with a buzzbait is compared to a plopper, they're similar-ish. They both, a lot of disturbance.
Much faster to retrieve though.
True. But the other cool thing is you can fish these over weeds.
Yeah.
Because a whopper plopper has treble hooks, and this has a single hook pointing up, you can literally cast this and like pull it over like lily pads and stuff, and it's fine.
Yep.
But we won't go too in depth on this, but the Evergreen Loud Buzz, this is a black one too. So it's black. Mm-hmm. I've got like a beaver style bait with kickers on the back, and it's got a black blade. This at night, it's going to be killer. But anyway, we're actually going to do an episode on night fishing one of these days. So why don't you do the fancy bait?
All right. Now again, this is not, we just had a giveaway with him actually. This is not part of the giveaway. I'm mentioning this purely because I have found a new favorite bait pretty much.
You've had that tied on every single trip for the last 2 months.
And I'll tell you why. Because I have caught my best fish of the year on this bait. So this is the Hashimoto Concepts, the Mag Blade
glide bait.
And this one is, I remember when you posted this online, it's a bluegill sunfish, or sorry, pumpkin seed sunfish pattern.
The pattern's
and
fantastic.
I saw it and I was like, that's the one I want. Please set that aside for me. So we set it aside. I picked it up at CanCast. Again, shout out to CanCast.
Yeah.
So I picked it up at CanCast and it sat there because that was what? That was in May? Or earlier?
April.
April
2nd, yeah.
So it sat, I just looked at it like every single day and I'm like, oh, the thing's like a piece of art. Like, I love it. So I started using it, and the first time I took it out of the, started casting in the water, I caught the biggest fish of the day on it. It was about a 3-pound bass.
Nice.
Fairly slow day, but like this, and the thing just hammered it. I had never had a largemouth bass attack. I think we talked about it. It's the same day that the loon followed this thing in.
Yeah. It looks real.
How many times have I had this sound and I cast and like I'll bring it up out of the water and you're like, oh, I thought that was a sunfish.
Yeah, because like
I kid you not, like I probably counted 4 or 5 times. You've literally thought that this is a real sunfish, either in the water or on the end of my rod. I just yank it out of the water.
It has, like, I'm not a glide bait or a big swim bait like expert. I do own a bunch of them. That has one of the best swimming actions I've seen on a smaller bait.
This is like my first. This is my second glide bait I've ever owned.
It's so fluid.
Yeah, I love this thing. So
you can tell that Brent like spent a lot of time designing this.
Yeah. The one downside I will say is the back hook. So he's got a magnet on the back to help keep it centered. So the back hook I find picks up most of the weeds if it's going to catch a weed on it, or if it gets jostled or something like that, or in the water, it'll kick off to the side, and it does track to that one side a bit. But it's not hard to get it pointed straight. And honestly, through results, I'm still going to use it. That doesn't. It's
and
not
how
a game
often?
changer
How
for
often
me.
does that happen though?
Not like it happens like fairly often today, but like I'm not at a hindrance.
It's not every cast.
No. But every single fish that I catch is on this big treble in the front. So I just caught again. This last trip we went on, this caught my biggest bass of that trip.
Yep.
And that was what, 3 pounds 4 ounces.
Yep.
I think
3.
Like a nice, decent fish.
Yep.
And just a couple ounces below your biggest one of the day.
Yeah, actually, I beat him by 3 ounces. It was a hard weekend though.
Yeah,
it was
hard.
bad, super windy.
Because so we were fishing this lake and it was just
white caps.
White cat is terrible. The wind's blowing us around. I'm fishing all these spots that I was using this last time. Caught a bunch of bass on. I was fishing chatterbaits. Nothing in the main lake. Nothing. We pushed up into this small little creek. I like rivers and creeks just because I find the weather doesn't affect them as much. Just with the moving water and coming from oftentimes either spring fed or from like a marsh area, the temperature of the water can sometimes stay warmer or stay more stable through weather changes. So anyways, we pushed into there and we started catching some bass. That was like the most action we had that.
Yeah, it was like 14-incher here, 12-incher there.
And so I'm like, Jesse's fishing some soft, he's flipping like small plastics, and I'm fishing the big blade. I caught a couple, bass on the big blade chatterbait. And then I periodically I'd bring this out whenever I'm like, okay, I can cast around those like weeds around that log, around that, whatever. I'm just casting it like they do in California at structure.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm in a boat. I can go pick it up if I snag it.
Yeah.
And I started getting a couple hits, and then I finally had like a big hit, and this bass like annihilated it.
Headshot. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. So this has been one of my most used baits this year. Again, it's got like hook rash on the side, which I love because it's showing like that it works. I use it. I throw it because I love it. And I want to get a couple more of these. Just I love the mag blade.
I'm probably gonna pick one.
You need to get one.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me that's the biggest producer this year for me has been the chatterbait for numbers. The best fish this year have all come on this bait for me. Yeah. And it's not the only thing I've been casting. I've been throwing a bunch of stuff, but the best fish have come on this. So that's worthy of becoming a highlight for me.
It's a fantastic bait, 100%.
Yeah.
Shot. And we'll do 2 more quick. One is a bait that I kind of went away from the last few years just because of chatterbaits. I was always a big spinnerbait guy. Remember like when we used to fish your cottage and I started fishing spinnerbaits, like trolling them, and you were just like, I don't even know.
With the pink twister tails in the back.
Yeah.
Always tipped it with the pink twister.
It works good. But I was fishing spinnerbaits a lot. And then when I kind of became obsessed with chatterbaits, I just kind of like, I'd still use them from time to time. Mm-hmm. But I got away from it. I'd always fish a chatterbait if I could get away with it. But this year I was like, you know what? There's a bunch of new spinnerbaits that came out and I wanted to try them. This is the Freedom Tackle Speed Freak.
Yep.
And you look at that. That's a smallie bait. This is the compact series.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a very cool bait. reasonably priced too. And I picked one up and I was like, you know what? I'm going to fish this because it's designed to be burned. So the head design, it's very compact. It's got this weird custom blade. It's kind of like the difference between an Indiana and a willow.
Yeah.
It's very unique. But the cool thing is with this spinnerbait, we just went out on the weekend and spinnerbaits for smallmouth, I find, if you burn them really fast, I always remember Kevin Van Dam saying, you don't want the fish to be able to study the bait too much. When it's a spinnerbait, you just want to reel it as fast as you can. You can't reel fast enough that a bass won't be able to catch it, a smallmouth, right? Yeah. So you don't want the fish to get too good of a look at it. So just cast it out and then reel it in and it'll bulge right underneath the surface.
Yep.
And this bait, what happens with a lot of spinnerbaits, if they're not designed to be fished fast, they'll like blow out.
They'll roll, yeah.
Or they'll like turn to the side, or the blade will hit the top of the water and just blow out. This one, the Speed Freak from Freedom Tackle, it works fantastic. You can literally bulge it right underneath, reel it in fast. This particular one, I got just the white one, and I put on that Pro Water Baits Magic Minnow in white. This is a white spinnerbait, and I've caught a bunch of fish on it so far, and it's been really good. And it kind of sparked that spinnerbait thing for me again.
You caught a couple bass on it, and then you got bit off by a muskie.
Yeah,
that was a good. It seemed like a good fish. We didn't actually see it in person, but like,
well, what happened was we came up to this rice. This flat with a bunch of rice on it.
That was a juicy spot.
And Andrew's like, oh, it's a new spot. And I was like, man, I hadn't been there before. This is a smallmouth spot. First cast with my spinnerbait.
Yep.
I caught a 15-inch smallmouth. Not a huge fish, but I was like, oh, nice. Second cast.
I caught one just a bit smaller than that, just like 30 seconds after.
Yeah. And then my second cast after Andrew's, I cast far out. I'm reeling in. All of a sudden I feel like, boom. And then, ting. Muskie bit me off. Or it was a giant smallmouth bass with teeth. I don't know. But anyway, you know what? We're going to cover this last one quick because this is one bait. We kind of covered
that was super cool.
This is a super cool bait.
Yeah.
Now, there's so much weird, complicated baits out there. And I always come down to it. I'm like, you know what? If I only had to buy like 3 plastics and 3 hard baits and 3 this, what would I buy? If I had to buy only 3 plastics, this would be one of them. This is the Pro Water Baits. I forgot what he calls this one. Anyway, it's like a paddle tail grub, like a beaver style.
It's beaver, yeah. It's like a beaver tail.
It's not like a kicking. Yeah. It's just like a flat. It's like a grub. I think it's 4 inches long. It's just a flat tail.
Thick body too. It's such a cool.
So the cool thing with these is you can flip them, and if you leave the tail like a regular flat beaver style tail, it like flutters down. Yeah, it's like fluttering.
It almost
like
glides too. Yeah. Like the side of it actually does.
And as you pull it up, it like paddles up and it drops down, and it pairs perfectly with a 3/0 hook.
Yep.
And I was fishing it like that, and then I remember that Vic, the guy who makes these baits, he said, "Oh, just get a pair of scissors and cut the back tail into a cut tail. Like you cut it at a 45-degree angle, like halfway up." It has the coolest thing ever.
That was awesome.
It turns it into like the same flipping bait, but with just this crazy wobble on the way down. And I smashed a bunch of fish on it.
Yep.
Again, the flipping bait wasn't super hot that day, but I'm going out this weekend and this is going to be one of the baits. And it's such a simple bait because like you could use this for anything. Yeah. You could flip it. You could use it as a chatterbait trailer. You could literally just fish it like, on a Carolina rig. You could literally probably just cut the tail like a cut tail, cast it out with a hook and just reel it right underneath the surface and catch fish on it.
Yep.
It's a very cool bait. Again, Pro Water Baits is a company that I met Vic at CanCast. And that's why
shout out again.
That's why I like CanCast, because you get to meet all these people. And you might be like, you know what? No store around me carries Pro Water Baits. The only store close to us is East Hill. Yeah. So if you don't fish or if you don't buy stuff at East Hill or other
whenever
stores,
I drive by East Hill, they're not open yet or they're closed because I drive by it on my way to driving up north or driving out east to go fishing. And I'm never driving by when it's actually open. So I don't get to go there very often.
It's true. So that's what I'm saying though. Like if you don't go to a store that stocks a particular brand, go to CanCast and all those brands are there and you can talk to the guys and girls that make the product. And like, I talked to Vic, like never met him before in my life. Yeah. He was like, so you like flipping for bass? I was like, yeah.
Did we just become best friends?
Yeah. He's like, showing me drop shot baits. I'm like, don't show me that crap. Just kidding. But anyway, he makes fantastic baits, a whole bunch of baits. And a lot of his baits, they're just like versatile. Yeah. Like they're just baits that like, you don't need anything fancy. This will catch fish. And they're really high quality. And the density of the plastic, it's really tough. And he has like a really interesting scent. It's not crazy weird smelling like some bait companies, but
it's like, I know for a long time is like, talk about scent. My favorite is like Berkeley, like Berkeley Power Bait.
That's classic.
It's like such a good scent. Yeah, I actually think that scent helps catch fish. This is another one. Like when I smell that, I'm like, that just smells like natural, greasy, oily. Like just,
Yeah.
I could 100% see that
It's
being an
infused
advantage.
with
It's really
pure
good.
bait extracts.
Yeah.
So anyway, Pro Water Baits. This is not, again, not sponsored. I just really like his stuff. I bought a bunch of stuff from him at CanCast. He was just like, oh, he had a deal on it. It was like 4 bags for whatever, $20. And I was just like looking through. So much cool stuff. And he had a bunch of guys. There's a guy named Mike who fishes, sponsored by him. And he has a YouTube channel. And I was watching his stuff and I was like, this guy hammers fish. So if you're listening to this, take us out on your boat, man. Anyway, we appreciate that. But anyway, this is a cool episode.
If you do have a bass boat, you'd like to take us out, you won't say no.
So like these baits, like we mentioned, they're nothing crazy.
No.
And I
The
find
most expensive thing was this. Again, it works really well, but we're also talking about my best producing one is like a $14 chatterbait.
Yep. Same with me. Chatterbait, nothing crazy. Spinnerbait, buzzbait, they're all basic baits. Actually, Andrew, before this episode, we were looking at all these lures and he's like, wow, they're basically all like some kind of jig.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the amount of things that have just like a lead head on a hook with either a blade or no blade. Because we talked about snap jig, talked about chatterbait, talked about the other bladed jigs there. We talked about spinner baits, buzz bait, all of them. Lead head, blade, flashy. Like
some years, like we fish a lot of finesse, like drop shot and stuff like that. This year, just where we fish, we're trying some new lakes this year.
Yeah.
It's just not drop shotty. They're more weedy. So drop shots are definitely a player. They were for us last year, really big. Like drop shots and Ned rigs and stuff like that. Just this year so far, the lakes that we fished.
I've still been fishing Ned rigs, but I'm fishing them around like sparse weeds cover, which is I've done really well with as well.
Weedless,
I didn't do that, but yeah, rigging it Texas rigged. Yeah.
But we'll get into that another day because we're almost over time. So
thank you very much for listening to episode 24, which is we're getting close to a quarter.
We're getting close to our 25, which is going to be sick. But again, we mentioned if you haven't given us a review on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, do that.
Yep,
Do it now.
100%.
Do it now.
Yeah, leave a rating, write a review. We do have a Patreon account, so if you would like to support the show, so if you'd like to join on Patreon, you can do so. That we have a link that Jesse has down below as well on the show notes. So thank you very much again for listening. Hope you enjoy the show, and we look forward to talking to you again and you hearing our wonderful dulcet tones of our voices next week on the Average Ontario Anglers podcast.